Thank you for virtually joining us today, and thank you to our panelists for your time today. First, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Michael DeDuke. I'm a partner in the asset management group at Perkins Coie, based out of the New York office. I've been a securities lawyer for about 19 years in private practice, almost 8 years at the SEC in the Division of Investment Management, OC, and then working with the commissioner on asset management issues. We've got a great panel today, and so what we're going to talk about first, just to set the table, is how advisors are using technology for compliance in this remote working environment. Next, we're going to talk about the SEC's Hub for Strategic Innovation in Financial Technology, otherwise referred to as FinHub. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how advisors are using technology, often referred to as RegTech, to enhance and improve their compliance programs. Before we jump into the topics today, I'd like to pass it off to the panelists to have them introduce themselves. So with that, I'm going to pass it off as I see them on the screen. I see Alex first in my screen. So Alex, would you mind introducing yourself and giving a little background?
Sure. Yeah. No, I'd be happy to. I'm Alex Gavis. I'm an in-house attorney at Fidelity Investments. I've been at Fidelity for over 20 years. Before that, I was in Washington at the SEC and in some other positions also. Generally speaking, I handle a lot of Fidelity's retail and retirement issues as they relate to helping our investors get what they need, and also I have experience in advertising and social media and technology. Passing off to, I guess, Jennifer?
Yeah, Jennifer, please.
Sure, thank you. So my name is Jennifer McHugh. I have been at the Securities and Exchange Commission for 22 years in various positions, all of which, though, focused on the investment management industry. Currently, I am a senior special counsel in our Disclosure Review Office, and I also am our Division of Investment Management delegate to the FinHub, which is probably most relevant to our topic today. Before we do get started in depth, I would like to say, as a reminder, that my remarks today represent my own views and not necessarily the views of the Commission, the individual commissioners, or my colleagues on the staff. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Keith?
Hi, everyone. My name is Keith Marks. I'm Executive Director with Compliance Solutions Strategies. My 20-year career has passed over compliance firms, National Regulatory Services, Senate Compliance Management, now Compliance Solutions Strategies. And we provide regulatory reporting and compliance services, and our focus is to make RegTech solutions for everybody. So I'm pleased to be with the panel.
Fantastic. Thanks, Keith. Thanks, everyone. All right, well, let's get started. So in many ways, COVID has created the need for a concentrated technology-driven approach to compliance obligations of advisors that address the need for seamless collaboration across a firm, increased automation, and continued use and enhancements of RegTech tools and capabilities across firms. Here's a question to the panelists to start off this discussion. How has each of your experience working remotely compared to before we went remote, and how has technology impacted that experience? Let's start with Jennifer.
Sure. And is this my personal experience or my observations with respect to investment advisors, or both?
Just your personal experience for now.
So I am someone who never teleworked. I was not a teleworker. I was in the office every day, frankly wearing a suit, taking the train in and out. And so when this hit us almost a year ago, it was a significant adjustment for me. I probably wasn't using a video camera for the first 3 or 4 months. I didn't have a laptop. So if I can do it, anyone can do it. I think that's the lesson of that story. I was a very inexperienced teleworker. I've adjusted to it, I think, pretty well. I think that, and I see this with the firms that we interact with as well, the technology that exists today really does enable meaningful telework, meaningful work from home. And once we got over kind of the adjustments initially of not being in the office, I think the transition has been seamless. And just to comment from what I heard from Pete Driscoll earlier today, I think that a lot of firms have had a similar experience.
That's great. I was the same way, Jennifer. I never teleworked when I was at the SEC, and I didn't telework in private practice, and so this was a big adjustment for me as well. Keith, what about you?
Well, I've traveled a lot, and our company had a lot of the tools that you needed in order to work remotely already available. So I did work in the office when I wasn't traveling, and so moving to a remote space meant simply taking my laptop and being able to plug in my Wi-Fi, and I was able to take my screen display home right away, which was a tremendous advantage as well. Having multiple screens and just being there and all set up. So technology-wise, I didn't have a difficult transition. At the more of the other side of it, it's isolating, and we have a lot of meetings, and we're still all very functional and productive. Jennifer said, and I think everybody has adapted incredibly well and worked hard at it. But you do end up without that part of the office that you had before outside of the technology.
Fantastic. And Alex, what about you? How has your experience been different?
Yeah, I think I had a similar experience in that I used to jump on the commuter rail and head into downtown Boston practically every day. Interestingly enough, though, our firm had, moved to have regional centers, and so some people on my staff and some of the people who I interact with, when I got into the office, I would be on Zoom calls for a lot of the day because there are people either in New Hampshire or North Carolina or whatever, and we'd all be on these calls. The difference is when I got home, and I was primarily at home, and our company really moved very quickly and very well to, embrace, video conference calling. I started out with a laptop on my knees in the den, and then I moved to the living room, and then I moved to the dining room, and then finally I moved into actually a sort of separate room and made it into an office. So like my office sort of got assembled over the course of maybe 2 or 3 months. And then, I sort of settled into a routine. The thing that I miss the most are those casual kind of not, running into somebody. We do use kind of a type of software that allows you to kind of, ping people or sort of immediately call them, but it's really not the same as running into somebody at the lunchroom or in the elevators and then just doing the sidebar. But, we're all coping.
Yeah, absolutely adapting, right? So sticking with you, Alex, can you talk a bit about how you and your team at Fidelity have used technology, or how technology has been adapted to the compliance obligations that Fidelity and your team focus on to continue those in this remote work environment?
Sure. Yeah, no, I can start. I think in some ways, when it comes to a company like the one I'm in, where we have such a large base of employees who really communicate with customers and clients, the movement to sort of remote working, has had a lot of challenges, but there are a tremendous also number of benefits to it. I mean, the idea that we have a lot of reps in the field, individuals who, are either registered investment advisor individuals or, registered with a broker dealer. Some of them, obviously most of them probably have dual registrations. On the one hand, they've all mostly moved to remote, and so they're working at home, and they've got challenges with respect to that. Some of the same things that we've just talked about, but even more so because now they're actually communicating with clients, and so they need a dedicated space, and they need to have quiet, and and they need to be able to concentrate so that they can actually help our clients. On the other hand, though, from the client standpoint, there are a lot of clients who, as we move to video conferencing and as we move to being able to schedule things sort of around clients, they don't have to jump in their car and go to an investor center. They don't have to, wait on the phone or whatever. They can do scheduling. That's been a benefit for them, and that's been something that I think has been really helpful. Along with that, though, comes then the compliance burden, which is suddenly, from a compliance standpoint, a lot of the traditional methods of, an in-office inspection or an in-office sort of follow-up, or even having compliance advisors that are closer to operations, is no longer available. And so now you've got from a compliance team, you've suddenly, you're having to come up with new and, in a sense, innovative ways of surveillance and communication. So I'll stop there because I don't want to talk too much. But
no, that's very helpful. And Keith, in your role as a consultant to RIAs and BDs, you see a lot of the landscape out there. Can you talk a bit about how folks are adapting their compliance programs to the remote working environment, and then adding technology on top of it to make it more efficient and more effective in a remote working environment?
Sure. We see that firms' business continuity plans really kicked in very well for firms initially when COVID hit. And I think, when Pete Driscoll spoke earlier, if you got the chance to listen to him earlier, he commented how he thought the industry did a great job. And I'd say, I would echo that firms had worked on business continuity planning over the years prior to COVID hitting. That meant that they were somewhat prepared to face the need of what needed to be done in the first short term, right? And then the SEC also did a good job. They stepped up and provided some relief about some work from home issues to firms that helped sort of, I think, set the stage, which is, okay, let's not get too myopic about the fact that we now have a document that somebody has printed at their home, right, and start throwing compliance flag. I think I heard that sentiment even from the enforcement attorneys who spoke. They mentioned that, it's not going to be an area that they're out there throwing flags at. My word, interpreting what she said. But the firms that made really strong efforts, that had good business continuity plans, that didn't let problems fall into the gutter, so to speak, and metastasize and become worse and really bad, we'll do fine, even though that there's probably some compliance violations with some books and records things that happened over the course of that really are just non-consequential to everybody's reaction to the pandemic and how they manage the compliance programs. I'm sure, Alex, you took some very practical approaches to some of the things that were happening with respect to the reps in the field, and then went out and find new tools to help them then cope better. So as the year's gone on, obviously, we've now found these other solutions. The platform, Zoom and WebEx and Teams have become critical and ubiquitous. Docs restoring, right? DocuSign is become important, and I hear them talk about legislation to make electronic signatures even more acceptable. So everybody, like you said, the industry seems to have stepped in. And I think what he said was, we couldn't have done this 5 years ago. And I was thinking we couldn't have done it 10 years ago, but he's probably right. 5 years ago, we would have never had the success that we had in March when the pandemic started.
Really interesting. Jennifer, any thoughts, reaction?
So I think I have two thoughts. One is, looking back over the last year, I think as a general matter, and as you noted, Pete said earlier today, we all are feeling pretty good about how both regulators and the industry adjusted to this new, what was a very sudden work from home environment. But I think, looking back, those first 2, 3, or 4 weeks, not only were we adjusting to an immediately announced work from home environment, we were adjusting to significant market upheaval at the same time. Those were very challenging times. So we weren't just dealing with compliance challenges, like what to do about, maintaining records. We also were dealing with some very significant market challenges too. And I think that there was, meaningful and useful communication between registered investment advisors, the SEC, in order to kind of get us through that initial challenging period. The other thing I would say is, at the top, I mentioned that I've been at the SEC for 22 years. And I think that this, kind of very successful transition to work from home didn't happen in a vacuum. I think about the various steps we took to get here, going back to Y2K, which ended up being a non-event, but really forced us to look at the systems and how we rely on them and what we would do if one or two or nearly all of them were knocked out. Sadly, that was followed by 9/11. We had experiences like Superstorm Sandy, threats of other pandemics that maybe didn't play out but got us thinking about what we might do in a pandemic. So, this didn't happen out of the blue. All of those past efforts, I think, built to our ability to be successful now.
I completely agree. I remember starting at the SEC in 2010. It was in January, and a massive snowstorm had hit DC, and I started the first day, and then we were out. The office was closed for a week, and there was no way to do any work. It just, the capabilities weren't there, and so it's come a long way. Absolutely. I'd like to ask everybody, because I've been thinking about this as I was preparing for the panel. How do you think this is going to evolve? So, hopefully everything eventually gets back to normal. When it does, what lessons are we going to learn, and what are we going to take from our work from home experience and bring it back to the normal work environment? What things are going to be, are going to move with us when we get back to the normal experience? Alex, what do you think?
Well, I guess, a couple things. One is, I think, from a sort of legal risk and compliance standpoint, particularly, in-house, that there was definitely somewhat of a shift over time. Obviously, we all, as Jennifer was saying, suddenly we're finding ourselves in this new situation, a new environment. But, so certainly were our clients and customers, and then also our business partners, the business folks who really needed to help those clients and customers get work done. And what they were really looking is, you'd have a client who was going to go buy an investor center and was going to drop off her TOA or was going to transfer money or this or that, and suddenly there's a roadblock, and suddenly there's, not the ability to communicate the way we did. And there was a lot of, I think, pressure to look back at the legal risk and compliance teams and say, hey, we've got rules and policies that say we can't do it this way, but we need to do it this way because there's no other way to do it, or whatever, the solution might be. And so that solutioning, I think, and that idea of having a tactical team who can really solution quickly and really come up with maybe creative ideas, and also, if needed to, reach out to the regulators of FINRA or an SEC or other regulators to float these ideas or float these solutions by quickly. Some of them are also, at the state level in terms of like notarization and things like that. And some of them were harder to answer than others. But I think the organization around sort of legal risk and compliance and creating tactical teams to address issues more quickly and really get to the bottom of what the substantive problem is, and then solutioning, and then trying to figure out, can we move forward, or do we need the regulators? Do we not? I think is something that's going to stick with us. I don't think it's going to go away, but certainly it was necessary during this time. So that's probably the number one thing. So
great. Keith, what do you think will be the lasting effects of what we learned in remote working as it applies, going forward? when things get back to normal?
Well, so we were already on a technology trend, right, before the pandemic started. And, the pandemic now, you can look at it this way, really then accelerated that trend. But we're going to go back to work, and, that acceleration piece will have increased the pace by which we're adopting more change. Additional DocuSign, ability to sign legal documents and changes like that Alex needed on the state level, and finding solutions for things like that. Those will definitely come out of it. And there's no doubt that the acceleration of the technology goes across our communications platforms, our surveillance needs and capabilities, and our ability to manage data, and our appreciation to move towards digitalization as much as possible, and other ledger technologies that I know that you're very familiar with, and to make these processes as efficient and as effective as the technology will allow us. Because if technology is going to be there to do it, it's going to demand that we use it and be more efficient.
Yeah, my experience through the pandemic counseling clients, one of my takeaways is that I think folks are going to be very focused on making sure everything is scanned and uploaded to the cloud. I'm representing a client going through an exam, and some of their documents were based in an office down in Argentina. And it was the early days of the pandemic. No one was going into the office, and we owed the exam team documents from their request, and we couldn't. The physical documents were in the office. These were not uploaded to the cloud, so we had to delay the response of those specimens. And so it taught my client a big lesson to make sure everything is scanned to the cloud. So that's something they implemented into their policies and procedures. Jennifer, do you have any thoughts on what's gonna carry over back into normal times from what we learned in our remote working?
So a few thoughts on the last point you just made. I think you were speaking about a client with records, paper records in Argentina. One of the lessons that we learned is that certain firms, many firms, may rely on back office functions that are performed outside of the United States, maybe in countries that don't have the same level of at-home technological capability that we have here. And that definitely did create a lot of challenges for firms. So that's something to keep in mind. And as we all can get back to normal, certainly that is a consideration to think about going forward. Reliance on personnel or geographic areas that don't necessarily have the same technological capabilities that we may take for granted kind of here in the United States. That's number one. On a more high level point, one of the takeaways for me, and again, this is personal, is that remote telework dispersed employees generally works. It works. For those who were maybe skeptical before, and that may be a generational divide, we've learned now that it works. It may raise unique compliance challenges, and you all have talked about some of those, and we need to be very, very sensitive to that, but we can do it. And the final thing I think is, and Alex spoke to this, I imagine all of us would agree, one thing that people miss is while we can accomplish what we need to accomplish, get the work done, so to speak, I think we all miss that informal interaction that can be professionally very important that you don't get in this current dispersed work environment.
I agree completely. Yeah, you can be on a Zoom call and have a personal conversation, but it's not the same as being in person in the break room or going to somebody's office and talking to them. I agree 100%. Right. So,
although on that, I would just add one thing, which is, the other thing that it sort of makes you realize when their work environment is right in their home environment too, which is setting boundaries, because we want to make sure that our employees are just that dividing line between working all the time and being at home is really difficult. And so you almost have to check yourself to understand and know that, maybe emails, there's a cutoff point at which emails don't necessarily fly around because I think it's hard for employees to do that detachment, and particularly I think in our industry, and so being sensitive to that I think is really important, and I think this has raised awareness to that.
I agree with that. And so while technology has been a fantastic blessing in this time and helped us all continue our jobs and for the most part do them efficiently, it does bring with it some risks, especially in a highly regulated environment. Wanted to hear from you all about the risks that you're paying particular attention to, maybe earlier on in the pandemic or early on in remote working, and then newer risks that have maybe have come up that weren't present at the beginning of the remote working experience. Keith, what risks are you paying particular attention to for your clients, and what risks are clients bringing to you based on their experience?
Well, the first risk, I guess we're still talking about the, start of the pandemic, and, was business continuity. And, solving that risk was, I think most people would put that on 90 or 95% of the report card. I would, curious of everybody's perspective on that. Once you're there and you've got business continuity established because you had a plan and you made it work, then, the rest of the stuff, I'm not saying it's not important. It's all very important, and the relationship and the ability to deliver to the clients is all part of that, and to find solutions to it. And I may be overstating it, but overcoming that first threshold, and then a lot of these other technologies that existed are now making it possible to do the things that Pete just talked about here on this slide, which is adapting across remote due diligence and service providers and sub-advisors, right? So, we used to do this. We used to go on site to do all of these interviews and talk about data production, and now we do it by Zoom, and it's not the same. I've heard prominent lawyers say taking a deposition would never be the same over video than doing it in the room, because you want to see body language. When you're compliant doing reviews, you want to see body language as well. But it's still possible. We adapt and we adopt, practices that are necessary for the times. And then I still think we'll have a little bit of a question on the back end about how much in the case of due diligence reviews, for example, we go back to always doing as much on site as we used to, or whether it's some more practical combination of before the pandemic. And I think it's going to be more of a combination than it was before. Less on site, less time spent travel by business people, and maybe that's only the next 5 years, but maybe it'll get better after that, because it'll improve travel, and travel will catch up in the technology to make it more capable of not wasting so much of our time.
And sort of just to drill down a little bit, what specific risks have popped up with the use of technology by your clients? One that's talked about a lot is keeping records of chats that employees may use, have with outside of the bounds of the firm's, communication equipment, whether it's just texting that wouldn't be captured as books and records, or Zoom calls or Snapchat or things like that, or WhatsApp. So have you seen those types of risks pop up with your clients?
Sure. There's some firms that didn't have access to some of the ubiquitous tools, or have the ability to put them in place as quick as others who had greater risk than a lot of firms. But for the most part, these technologies were pretty well proven at this point, I think, and we're already going into place and accelerated it. And so there were communication platforms readily available to turn on systems to capture those technologies in fairly short order. So I don't think those are too much more of the risk, but the amount of electronic communications that increased as a result, as firms added slack between investment professionals who used to talk to each other all day and they started to get really like texty back and forth about it, and then suddenly you had all this new volume. Certainly it was like an increased practical challenge for a lot of compliance departments as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Alex, what are some of the risks that you're focused on with you and your team and Fidelity as a whole with the use of technology and remote learning or remote working? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, you pointed out, a risk that's been there, and I don't think it's necessarily, extremely new, but I think it gets definitely, blown out more when you're talking about, remote workforce and avenues of communication and making sure that, particularly if you're hiring new individuals, making sure that they're understanding of the regulatory obligations around supervision and surveillance and record keeping. And it's hard because there's certainly new apps that are coming out all the time. There are new ways of communicating. There's, in this always on environment, there's the possibility of clients picking up, new communications apps and software and then trying to communicate with, representatives in that way. And, and things can snowball. And so I think, training is key, being able to create awareness within the firm, governance. So I think that's probably, a significant area. The other area really, I think, is certainly with technology, and this isn't necessarily new with the pandemic, but the movement to agile development processes and much more faster sort of development of new ways in which to communicate with customers and clients, and ways in which to build out new tools and to test them relatively quickly and co-develop them with, focus groups and others. That business model is wonderful because it's borrowing from what technology companies have been doing for a long time. But in a regulated environment, it also means, sometimes you have to have some caution because you want to make sure that what you're going out with really meets all the regulatory requirements. And so, it puts a lot of pressure on legal risk and compliance teams to sort of be involved and get in there. And when you're in a remote environment with Zoom or you're not in the team room, so you're not hearing all the sidebar conversations and huddling over on the right hand side of the room with the guys who are looking at this and moving over there. Because of that, it's a much harder work environment.
Great. Thank you. And Jennifer, any specific risks that you focus on or you're thinking about? I know that OC did come out with a risk alert last year. Was it August of last year that out their observations of the risks that could be and may be present with remote working in a regulated environment like this. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and the things you're paying attention to from a risk front.
Sure. So it's funny because to prepare for this panel, I did review that OC. They were called OC then, so it's okay to say it. That OC Risk Alert.
Yes, that's right.
From August of 2020. And you can see on the slide some of the very important areas that they focus. Protection of investor assets, supervision of personnel, certainly a challenge when everyone is dispersed. Protection of sensitive information, the same. And those are really important areas to focus on, and compliance professionals should be focused on. But what I honed in on when I was preparing for this is there's a footnote. It's an innocuous footnote that comments about the fact that the compliance rule has a requirement in it. This isn't a surprise to anyone that firms should at least annually assess their compliance policies and procedures to make sure that they are adequately prescribed to meet compliance with the Investment Advisors Act and its rules. And it just struck me because we literally are a week away from when we all dispersed and went into this remote work environment. And I guess I would just say, if there is a firm out there that hasn't in that year made some adjustment to their compliance policies and procedures to somehow reflect these new communication tools, the new work environment, I would just encourage compliance professionals to think about that and make sure that they do, because it's hard to imagine that there wouldn't have needed to be some adjustment or update.
Right. I've seen many business continuity policies and procedures, as I'm sure everyone here on the panel has, and I don't think not one that I can remember took into account a situation like this. They did take into account pandemics, but they were always a week or two, or maybe even a little bit longer. But no one ever, no BCP that I saw or reviewed ever had and taken into account something like this that we're experiencing. Well, that's fantastic. So we've got two more topics to get to, so I'm just conscious of the time. So switching gears, but staying on the theme of technology, in 2018, the SEC established the Hub for Strategic Innovation and Financial Technology within the Division of Corporation Finance. And it was headed by Val Spanik, and it was set up to lead the SEC's efforts to encourage innovation in the financial sector in four areas. The first area is, let me just pull up the slide so everyone can see. First area is digital marketplace financing. The second area is blockchain, or otherwise called distributed ledger technology and digital assets. Automated investment advice, otherwise known as robo-advisors, and then artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning. So those are the four areas that the FinHub was set up to address. In December of this year, we got some news from the SEC that FinHub was becoming its own office within the SEC, which is a big deal, and we'll get to that in a minute. But they announced that it was becoming its own office within the SEC, and Valerie Spanik would continue to lead it as director, and she would report directly to the chair. And so wanted to understand a little bit more about the FinHub for our attendees and get an insider's perspective on the FinHub, how it works, and why it's such a big deal that it's a new office and not within the Division of Corporation Finance. So Jennifer, would you mind sort of enlightening us on those topics about FinHub, why it's a big deal, and then your experience as a representative from the Division of Investment Management, how have you liaised with FinHub, and if you could give us some sort of high-level topics of things that you've talked to them about, that would be wonderful.
Sure. So to date, the way the FinHub is operated within the SEC is what I refer to as sort of a one-stop shop. So people outside the SEC who are interested in offering a new technology-based product or innovation, understanding the regulatory implications of perhaps, serving as a robo-advisor or incorporating a new form of artificial intelligence into their investment selection process or marketing process, etc. They can easily, through a single portal available on our website, reach out to the FinHub, and we have a representative from each of the major divisions and offices at the SEC, and we can make sure that the right group of people can be assembled to meet with that outside participant, talk about the issues, hear about their interesting innovations, not give legal advice, but potentially suggest that they consider certain regulatory issues that may be presented. I will say a lot of the entities that come to us are people who come from a coding background, data programming background. They're technology providers first, and they are entering the world that we all know, which is a heavily regulated financial services world. And so, they speak a lot of engineering speak. They're not lawyers first and foremost. So it is a good dialogue. It's a healthy dialogue. And I know we learn a lot from the outsiders we speak with, and I hope that they gain a lot from meeting with us as well. We engage with people if they want to do, individual meetings with us. We do a lot of phone calls. Recently, we've been doing what we call peer-to-peer meetings. Prior to the pandemic, those peer-to-peer meetings were geographically located. So a core group of us would go to Denver or Philadelphia and very informally kind of meet with people in those areas who wanted to talk about financial innovations. Since then, that's not possible, so we've decided to do a thematic approach. The first thematic area was AI. Market participants who are interested in AI, have a new product, want to incorporate AI more directly, we welcome them to meet with us. And again, my job as a liaison is to make sure that the right people within my division and my colleagues do the same are there to present appropriate issues and, again, get up to speed on what is going on. Couple of things I would say. You mentioned the 4 areas that we focus on. I've been a member or a delegate to the FinHub since it launched in 2018. I think just because of the area, the kind of marketplace area of focus since that time, much of our work has focused on blockchain and distributed ledger technology, digital assets. It's just been for lack of a better term, a hot topic in that period. Digital marketplace financing is certainly emerging. A lot of people refer to DeFi, which is where you have, financing replaced by traditional financial services entities, with some sort of programmatic technology-based access to capital. It's getting a lot of attention, particularly in the last year. And there have been alternate sources. Things like peer-to-peer loans have been around for a while, et cetera, but we're definitely seeing emerging technologies there. Automated investment advice, robo-advisors, obviously this audience is very familiar with that concept. But artificial intelligence and machine learning is definitely a growing area. I noticed in the exam priorities that were issued, I think earlier this week, certainly, the creation, the receipt, the protection as appropriate of data that comes in through artificial intelligence sources, I think is an area that our exam team, will be looking at. And it's certainly an area that compliance professionals, within investment advisory firms should be focused on. I do think that the fact that FinHub has become its own office is a really good development at the SEC. They're in the process of building out staff, so they won't necessarily have to rely solely on this liaison function. They're certainly keeping the liaisons, but there will now be dedicated staff devoted to this function. It also heightens the FinHub within the SEC internally. As you said, Val now will report to the chairman. She'll be involved in all of the senior leadership meetings, incorporating a focus on, developing technologies and financial innovation into the core group of senior leaders at the SEC. And that's probably going to be important because the SEC's chairman nominee, Gary Gensler, who had his nomination hearing on Tuesday, is a recognized expert in this area. So obviously he's going to have a lot to bring to bear and a lot of interest we are expecting in this area. The other thing I would mention is that Val Cispanic, who is the leader of the FinHub and is the head of the new office, she's a lawyer, like a lot of us at the SEC, but first and foremost, she's an engineer by training. So she really speaks a technical language. She's genuinely interested in the technology. And so I think that enables her to be easy to relate to for a lot of the technology providers that interact with us. So I guess I'd say, bottom line, the FinHub is there to be a resource as people need it. We do want to, we're always, as regulators, I think we're always likely going to be a step behind in terms of emerging technologies. They bubble up from the private sector and then we learn about them, but we really want to use this as a way to stay abreast of emerging technologies, interact with those who are bringing, interesting investor-focused innovations to the marketplace, and help people remain compliant and do it in a legally allowable manner.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. That is all consistent with my experience with the FinHub. I had a fantastic experience working over the past year with the FinHub on behalf of a client. From the moment we engaged the FinHub to the day we got the no action letter issued for our client, it was just a fantastic experience. all of the individuals we dealt with at the FinHub were very professional, were just so smart, and really dug into the issues, not just the legal issues, but wanted to understand the technology, wanted to understand why we were asking for this, not just from a securities law standpoint, but just how it would work with the other regulatory bodies that would touch this product. And it was just a wonderful experience. My client was thrilled with the outcome, obviously, but also with the time and attention to detail they paid to my client's request, their responsiveness, turnaround time, and just the overall expertise. It was just a fantastic experience. So it seems to be doing its job and working really well. So I assume by putting into this dedicated resources to it, it's just going to be fantastic, even more than it already has been.
Thank you. And I'll share that with my colleagues. Thanks.
Please do. It was wonderful. Keith, have you or any of your clients had any interactions or experience with FinHub?
Well, we've been talking with a couple participants, just really starting discussions about artificial intelligence solutions around creating disclosure documents, for example. But we're very much in the beginning of that, and I know that's the topic that the SEC is looking at in a number of ways.
And Alex, what about you? Any interaction? I know Fidelity as an organization is involved in blockchain and custody, but your particular sort of group within Fidelity, have you had any interaction or need to reach out to FinHub?
I don't think so at this point. I think we've heard Valerie and others speak about the FinHub on to various industry groups and very interested in development. So, it seems like a very positive development. I also note FINRA has also a similar, they've established the FinTech Industry Advisory Committee that I sit on, and Valerie's come and talked to that committee, and there's cross-representation there. So I think there's a lot going on, which is good.
Right. Yeah, and the CFTC also has a lab CFTC, which is similar as well. So. Yep. That's great. So just paying attention to time here, wanted to jump to the last topic, which is RegTech. So as financial services firms seek to keep pace with regulatory compliance requirements, they turn to new and innovative regulatory technology to assist. This new technology is often referred to as RegTech or CompliTech, two terms that are often used interchangeably, but also CompliTech is sometimes considered a subset of RegTech. In my own practice, I see a lot of my clients continuing to invest significant amount of resources into RegTech solutions, particularly after they go through a mock exam or a real exam. It really shines a light on the holes or the places they really need to beef up, and instead of hiring more people, they are focused on doing it efficiently by incorporating RegTech solutions. So I'd like to turn to Keith to talk about this topic. I think it's sort of near and dear to your heart, and talk about your experience with RegTech and CompliTech, and maybe sort of just frame those two terms for us. I know I mentioned that sometimes they're used interchangeably, but if you could just talk about what those two terms mean to you and mean to your clients, that would be a great way to start this last section off.
Sure. I think CompliTech is probably a subset of RegTech, but I'm not real hard and firm about that opinion either. But, if you include the fact that the regulators design their own regulatory technology, so the NEAT tool has been mentioned a number of times, for example, and, they have sometimes the same exact purpose as a firm would have in managing their own compliance. Sometimes they have other purposes, right? Detect other patterns and trends as well. So either way, the financial firms that are listening know that there are new technology tools coming down like every day at this point, and that there's a lot of development happening in it. Burgeoning industry. It's a part of the whole tech boost we've seen post-COVID. but this technology boost, this digitalization process was started before COVID, like, as I mentioned before, and I think it's just accelerated again, and firms, they're going to be, firms are challenged to do more compliance in the future all the time. I could have said that 10 years ago, I could have said that 20 years ago, I can say it now. They're going to be challenged to do more in the future without necessarily receiving an increase in resources. And so you're going to have to step into the RegTech, CompliTech world for as many answers as possible. And I think firms are, extra sensitive to that, having just, responded to the pandemic and learned lots of lessons from that as well. And know that, in some cases, firms want to reduce their footprints. They want to do things more efficiently. And, this is how they find those types of solutions and get a deeper understanding of the data that you're looking at. Really be able to detect patterns in information that you could never do with your own eyes trying to go through information. And that can apply to the concept of applying AI to e-com surveillance, or it can apply to analyzing trading patterns and practices that are happening at a firm. Yeah, so this slide, right, shows some of those solutions.
Yeah, could you walk us through some practical applications of RegTech to some of your clients? It would be really helpful to understand how they are working on the ground.
Sure. So you have examples here of AI being used to help provide surveillance solutions. We talked a little bit about that earlier. And AML compliance is certainly another example of it. And now we have, as I said, there's always more burdens, right? Buried within the Defense Act was the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2020, which requires additional data from owners of foreign companies, and there'll be more needs in the AML compliance bucket to be able to run metrics for custodians and broker-dealers in particular. I think in the more mainstream of what we see with investment management firms, code of ethics platforms, systems that can manage risk assessments and trading analytics solutions are very core CompliTech solutions that firms need and should be looking to. And, it's a good point made on this slide, which is that you want to be involved with tools that have embedded with them the regulatory intelligence to make them work, right? That's why they're called RegTech and not just some other tech product that's more generic, right? They're specifically designed to meet the regulatory reporting needs, the types of analysis that are needed, the means that create the AI or the compliance expertise that people have to put into it. Don't get the idea that all this stuff is here, like everything's digitized now, right? Nobody listening should be thinking about that. But we're probably still in the infancy of this whole cycle of being digitized and running surveillance through artificial intelligence. In the protection of financial assets through foreign borders and AML compliance, there's a lot more sophisticated banking things that are not, that stuff's there, but there's still a way to go for the rest of us to apply technology to the types of compliance testing and analysis that we can get a lot of benefits out of.
Alex, have you or your colleagues at Fidelity had any experience with RegTech solutions and tools?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say that we've been looking at this area quite a bit, and there are a couple of different areas, I think, maybe to bucket them. We're looking at sort of the application of robotics, the application of machine learning and AI, and then augmentation. In the robotics area, there are some pretty neat applications that you can do. For example, creating a sort of automated bot that will scan a workflow database for expired content and nominate that content upward to say, okay, this is communications content that needs to be re-reviewed. Rather than having a human go through the database, you can certainly get a bot to go through the database, and that's a good compliance control. Same with surveillance of emails, for example, looking for emails that may include account information in them or social security numbers that maybe should be encrypted. On the machine learning side, there are a lot of applications to be looked at, particularly in the lexicon area where you've got lexicon-based supervision. You can create modules that would pull out complaints, and that kind of the module learns over time what complaint language looks like, and then gets better and better. And so, looking through your database, you might be able to pull out those complaints for further processing or more quick processing. In the augmentation area, we've been looking at things like communications review, the review of advertising and sales literature. Certainly, if you're able to sort of program the SEC and the FINRA rulebook around communications, you may be able to augment compliance reviewers' reviews so that when the communications go into the system for a first sort of look, that there are comments that may come back with the communication that will help the reviewer understand that there may be problems with the communication, or there may be things that need to be improved. That also can work for individuals who may be creating the communications in the first place. In other words, a writer might be able to put her communications through an application that then she could understand, well, if I sent this to compliance, this is what I get back from compliance. So lots of applications there that can be done, and we're looking at, and certainly that there are commercial applications, but there are also ways in which you can kind of create your, you can build up internally and then help your internal processes.
That's great. That's super helpful. Any thoughts on RegTech solutions? I mean, it seems like a great thing where we can use technology to enhance and make compliance more effective, right? And take away the human element to a certain degree. So any thoughts on the use of RegTech in such a regulated area like investment advisors?
Is that for me or for the panel?
Oh, I'm sorry, for Jennifer, sorry.
Okay, sure. So, one thing, and this is putting my FinHub hat back on, one thing we hear a lot from entities that are interested in making the most of blockchain technology is this idea of smart contracts, which is really the ability to program contracts or nodes on a blockchain for purposes of various compliance elements. So, for example, if you're doing a private offering that's only available to accredited investors, is there a way to program a node so that only people who have been previously identified as accredited investors are able to purchase a security? Is there a way to program in people who are potential investors who may have been whitelisted from an AML, KYC sort of perspective into that kind of a smart contract? If there's a holding period on a privately offered security of 12 months, is there a way to program in something so that that security cannot be transferred for 12 months? So a lot of interesting ideas out there. And, a lot of people with respect to blockchain focus on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, which blockchain underlies those assets. But there are a lot of other potential uses for blockchain that may be, very innovative for the financial services industry in the years to come, particularly with respect to compliance and RegTech.
I couldn't agree more. So we are up against the clock here. It's 3. I want to thank you all for listening to our panel. And I want to thank the panelists for their time and their insights. It's been great talking about this topic, and thank you very much for joining us today.